On the quiet outskirts of Earth's newest settlement on a distant planet, a human named Ethan lived a simple life. The city had been built quickly, as the people who came to this new world had big dreams of peace and unity. Most of them, however, didn't know what was about to unfold, nor did they know the threat that silently crept toward them. Ethan was not just any person. He wasn't a leader of any organization, nor did he hold a title of any importance. Yet his presence here mattered. His words inspired the people who lived in this peaceful colony to work together, share, and live as equals. He carried within him a vision of unity among humans and aliens, and this was why he had become a target. The Empire, a powerful and ruthless organization that had grown over the years, saw Ethan as a threat. He wasn't the only one speaking out against them, but he was the most effective. The resistance was growing, and the Empire knew they needed to end it before it could truly gain momentum. They couldn't afford a leader like Ethan to remain alive, so they sent one of their deadliest agents, an alien assassin named Zira. Zira had been trained for this job from the moment she was born. Her race had a long history of assassins, all skilled in the art of stealth, combat, and lethal precision. Zira was one of the best, perhaps the best of all. Cold, emotionless, and efficient, she had never failed a mission. But Ethan, the man she was sent to eliminate, was unlike any target she had ever been assigned. Her shuttle landed in a dense forest just outside the settlement. The thick trees and underbrush made it easy for Zira to approach unnoticed. She moved swiftly and silently through the forest, her footsteps barely disturbing the ground beneath her. She had been given detailed information on Ethan's schedule, his daily routine, and his habits. He was predictable, a man who enjoyed the quiet and peace of his surroundings. And that's why Zira knew this would be easy. But she had been wrong. She reached the clearing where Ethan usually walked in the mornings. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft golden light across the land. Zira spotted him immediately, walking alone down the path, his head slightly down as if lost in thought. He looked calm, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the man she had been told to kill. Her mind prepared to carry out her mission as she watched him, yet something unusual stirred within her. She had felt it the moment she saw him, an unexpected hesitation, a feeling she had never known before. Zira's hand gripped the hilt of the blade hidden beneath her cloak. She had planned to end this quickly, but as Ethan drew closer, she hesitated, a feeling in her chest she couldn't name rising. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He wasn't supposed to look so human, so real. She had expected to see a cold leader, someone deserving of death, but what she saw was someone who seemed so familiar. Ethan looked up just in time to meet her gaze. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another. His eyes, a deep blue, held no fear. They were calm and steady, as if he had seen the worst the world had to offer and still stood tall. Zira had killed many, but this human, something about him was different. "Are you lost?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle but carrying strength. His words weren't the sharp, demanding tones of someone expecting a fight, but instead, the soft invitation of someone who offered a chance for understanding. Zira's grip on the blade tightened, but she did not draw it. She had trained for every situation. She had been told that when she faced him, she would feel nothing but the cold satisfaction of completing a task. But instead, there was doubt. Doubt. Something that had no place in her world. "I'm not lost," she replied, her voice steady but colder than she felt. "I'm here to do a job." Ethan's gaze softened, but he did not flinch. He seemed to understand something Zira hadn't expected. She had been trained to see humans as weak, predictable, and easily manipulated. But Ethan was different. He didn't shrink back, didn't show fear. Instead, he simply watched her as if he could see past her disguise, past the deadly assassin she was meant to be. "Then, do your job," he said, his voice still calm, almost inviting her to make the first move. Zira's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear. No, this was something else, something far more confusing. In that moment, she realized she was not in control. Her mission was simple: eliminate him before he could disrupt the Empire's plans. But as she stood there, her hand still hovering over the blade, she found herself questioning why she was, even here. Why was this human different? What was it about him that made her hesitate? For the first time in her life, Zira felt something other than duty and rage. She felt confused, and that confusion began to grow with each passing second. "Don't know what you're doing here," she said finally, her voice low, "but I can't do this." Ethan's expression remained unchanged, but there was a hint of understanding in his eyes. "You don't have to." Zira stood frozen, staring at him. For the first time, she didn't see him as a target. She didn't see him as an obstacle. She saw him as a person, a human who had a belief, a purpose, and perhaps even a future that didn't involve her. Zira turned her back on him, slowly at first. She could hear him speaking, but she didn't hear the words. It wasn't fear that pushed her away, it was something else. A feeling that didn't belong in the mind of a cold assassin. As she disappeared into the forest, she didn't know what she was running from, but she knew she wasn't done with Ethan. Not yet. Zira moved silently through the dense woods, the morning light filtering through the trees above. Her heart, normally calm and focused on her mission, now felt like a storm was brewing inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. Her last encounter with Ethan had left her troubled in ways she couldn't explain. She was supposed to be a hunter, an assassin with no emotional attachments. But Ethan, he had changed something in her, even if she didn't understand what that something was. She pushed through the thick underbrush, making her way back to the settlement. There was no turning back now. She had a job to finish. The Empire's orders were clear: eliminate Ethan. The resistance was gaining power, and he was at the heart of it. He couldn't be allowed to live. But what if... Zira shook her head. There was no time for doubt, no time for second thoughts. The settlement was just ahead, small and peaceful. The people here had built their lives from nothing, determined to create a place where humans and aliens could live together in harmony. Ethan had helped make it happen. He was the face of the dream. And now, he was the greatest threat to everything the Empire stood for. Zira knew that, in the eyes of the Empire, there was no room for dreams like his. They saw it as weakness, and weakness needed to be erased. She stepped carefully into the settlement, moving through the shadows to avoid detection. Her training kicked in. She was an assassin, a shadow among shadows. She was made to be unseen, to be deadly. But as she moved, her mind wandered back to Ethan. She had seen something in his eyes that day, a kindness, an openness that was not common in the galaxy. Most humans were driven by survival, by ambition, or by revenge. But Ethan, he seemed to be driven by something else entirely, something better. And for a moment, Zira felt a strange longing for that same thing. She paused for a moment, standing at the edge of the settlement, hidden behind a building. She could see Ethan standing near a small park, talking to a group of people. His voice was calm but powerful, and the people around him listened intently. It was as though the world stood still when he spoke. He was a leader, and not because he commanded respect, but because he earned it. Zira could see that. Her hand instinctively reached for the blade at her side. The mission. She couldn't forget the mission. Ethan looked up suddenly, his gaze sweeping across the settlement. Zira froze, her body tensing as she realized he was looking directly at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She could feel his eyes on her, even from across the open space. There was something in that look, something that made her chest tighten. She could tell he had recognized her, even though she was still, hidden in the shadows. There was no fear in his eyes, no suspicion, just curiosity. He was waiting for her to make the first move. It was then that Zira realized something else. Ethan wasn't like any other target she had faced. Most of her victims were too afraid to act, too afraid to even acknowledge her presence until it was too late. But Ethan was different. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't running or hiding. He was waiting. Zira's mind raced. She could feel the mission's weight pressing down on her, but she also felt the pull to speak with him, to understand why he was different. The Empire's orders were clear, but what if this was the wrong choice? What if this man had something to offer the galaxy that she had never considered? Her hand loosened on the blade, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to step out of the shadows, walking towards Ethan. She knew the danger of exposing herself, but something inside her urged her to go to him. She couldn't explain why as she approached. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply smiled at her, his eyes bright and open, as if he had been expecting her all along. "You came back," he said, his voice warm. "I didn't think you'd come." Zira stopped just a few feet from him, her mind still racing. "I didn't come back," she said quietly, her voice betraying her confusion. "I was never here. To begin with, I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "The job to kill me?" Zira's heart skipped a beat at his words. He didn't seem afraid. He wasn't angry. He was just calm. The way he said it, it was as if he had already accepted the possibility. His words made her realize how strange her mission was in the first place. She was supposed to be a professional, an expert at what she did. And yet, here she was, standing in front of a man who was neither afraid nor angry at her. There was no fight in him, just peace. "Yes," Zira said, the word coming out hollow. "But I can't do it." Ethan nodded, as though he had been expecting her answer. "You don't have to," he said simply. "I've seen you. I know what you are. You're more than this." Zira's mind spun. How could he possibly know what she was? He didn't know her, didn't know what she had done, the life she had led. Yet, he spoke with such certainty. His words were like a warm light, a stark contrast to the darkness she had known. "I'm not like you," Zira said, her voice faltering for the first time. "I'm an assassin. That's who I am." Ethan took a step closer, his eyes softening. "That's just a part of you. It doesn't define you. You have the power to change. We all do." Zira's heart pounded, and she had to fight to keep her composure. She had never met anyone like him before. Ethan wasn't like the people she had known. He didn't see her as a tool, a weapon. He saw her as a person. She had been sent to kill him, but now, standing there in front of him, Zira wasn't sure she could. Zira spent the next few days trying to make sense of what had happened. She had returned to the shadowy corners of the settlement, trying to push away the confusion that had started to take root. Ethan's words lingered in her mind, like a faint melody she couldn't quite shake. "You don't have to." It was all she could hear in her quiet moments. She had been trained her entire life to be a weapon, silent, lethal, efficient. Emotions were nothing but distractions, unnecessary weights that slowed the kill. But when she looked at Ethan, she felt those weights in her chest. The way he had spoken to her, not as a threat, but as if he truly saw her, it made her wonder whether her entire purpose was a lie. The next morning, she couldn't stay away. Against her better judgment, Zira found herself once again standing in the shadows, watching Ethan from a distance. He was out in the same park, talking to the people. This time there were more of them gathered, humans, aliens, children, all listening to him with rapt attention. There was no fear in their eyes, no hatred, only trust and hope. It was strange. Zira had never seen a crowd respond to anyone like this. She had witnessed crowds before, crowds of soldiers ready to fight, crowds of people terrified of the Empire's rule. But this was different. This was peace, and Ethan was at the heart of it. As she watched, something inside her began to shift. The human resistance had grown over the months, but it was Ethan who had brought them all together. It wasn't violence or power that drew people to him. It was his belief in something more, something that seemed impossible in a galaxy dominated by war. Ethan believed that peace could exist, not just between humans and aliens, but between all living beings. Zira's mind raced. Was that even possible? She had always been taught that peace was a fantasy. There was only war, only survival, only victory for those who were strongest. But here, in front of her, was a man who dared to believe otherwise. And the strange thing was, people were following him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She saw it clearly now. Ethan wasn't just fighting for his people. He wasn't even fighting for his species. He was fighting for everyone, humans, aliens, all of them. His mission wasn't to destroy, it was to unite. Zira's heart clenched. It wasn't just his words that moved people. It was him, his sincerity, his kindness, his unwavering conviction in something better. He wasn't like the leaders she had been trained to see, greedy, power-hungry individuals who only cared about themselves. Ethan had no ambition for power. His ambition was for something far more rare in the galaxy: peace. She was still watching him when Ethan noticed her. His eyes scanned the crowd, but then they paused, locking onto her. Zira felt a moment of panic. She couldn't hide, not anymore. He had seen her, and he wasn't walking away. Ethan excused himself from the crowd, making his way towards Zira with the same calm stride she had seen before. His eyes were steady, kind. As he approached, he didn't look at her with suspicion or fear. He looked at her as if he expected nothing less than her presence. "Zira," he said, his voice warm. "I didn't expect you to be back." Zira couldn't help but feel a pang of uncertainty. "I didn't expect to be back," she admitted quietly, her voice betraying her inner conflict. "But I had to see you again." Ethan smiled, that same peaceful smile that made her chest tighten. "I'm glad you did. I think you came here for a reason, not just to complete your mission." Zira was silent for a long moment. She didn't know how to answer him. She had come to kill him. She had come with nothing but the Empire's orders in her mind. And yet here she was, standing in front of him, not with a weapon in her hand, but with a question she couldn't answer. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice small. "How can you believe in peace? How can you fight for something that everyone says is impossible?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes never wavering. "I don't believe peace is impossible. I believe it's the only way forward. We can't keep fighting each other forever. If we do, there will be nothing left, nothing but war and destruction." Zira felt a weight in her chest. "But it's so hard," she said quietly. "I've seen what happens when people try to make peace. It never works. There's always someone who wants to tear it apart." "Maybe," Ethan said, his voice soft, "but I think that's why we have to keep trying. If we give up, if we stop believing, then it really will be impossible. But if we keep fighting for it, if we stand together, then maybe, just maybe, it can be real." Zira felt a stirring in her chest. It was as if the walls she had built around herself, walls made of cold training and years of killing, were beginning to crumble. She wanted to believe him, more than anything. She wanted to feel the same hope that seemed to flow so freely from him. But she had seen too much to be so easily convinced. "I don't know if I can change," she whispered. "I've been taught to fight, to kill, to never question orders. That's who I am." Ethan stepped closer to her, his presence calm but powerful. "You're more than that, Zira. You're not defined by your past. You have the power to change, to choose who you want to be." Zira felt a lump form in her throat. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this, not with judgment, not with expectations, but with understanding. For the first time, she didn't feel like a tool, a weapon to be used. She felt like a person. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do anything. Just start by being you. That's all anyone can ever ask for." For a moment, Zira stood there, uncertain. But deep inside, a small spark of hope flickered, something she hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan was right. Maybe peace was possible. Maybe she wasn't too far gone to change. Zira spent the next few days in a haze, her thoughts tangled with Ethan's words. She had always been so sure of herself, so certain of her purpose. But now, every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, his steady gaze, and heard his voice, telling her that she was more than just an assassin. She could still remember how it felt when he told her that she could change. It was a feeling she had never known, a kind of warmth that reached deep inside her, unraveling the cold walls she had built over the years. Despite the storm inside her, Zira knew she couldn't ignore the mission. The Empire's orders were clear, and she had a duty to fulfill. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea of killing Ethan felt wrong. He wasn't the enemy she had been told he was. In fact, he was everything she had been taught: to destroy, the symbol of hope, unity, and peace. And that's exactly why the Empire saw him as a threat. Her feet carried her back to the settlement, each step heavier than the last. She had to see him again. She had to understand what it was about him that made her question everything. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't do it. She couldn't kill him. The very thought filled her with dread. She reached the park where Ethan often spent his time, surrounded by the people he was working to protect. She stood in the shadows, hidden from view, watching as he spoke to a group of people. His words were always full of hope and encouragement. She couldn't help but admire the way he made others believe in something greater than themselves. As she watched, Zira felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't fear or confusion this time. It was a longing for something she never had, a place where she belonged, where her actions could be driven by something more than duty. She had spent so long being a weapon for the Empire, so long following orders without question, that she had forgotten what it meant to choose for herself. And now, standing here, watching Ethan, she realized that she didn't have to keep being that person. Her mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. Was it possible for someone like her to change? Could she really walk away from everything she had known and join a cause so different from what she had been trained to do? Could she find peace within herself? Or had the Empire's hold on her been too strong? The moment Ethan turned and saw her standing there, hidden in the shadows, Zira felt her heart race. He smiled, that warm, welcoming smile that seemed to make everything feel right. He didn't look at her with suspicion or fear. He simply saw her, not as an assassin, not as an enemy, but as someone who was struggling to find her way. "Zira," he said, his voice calm but full of understanding. "I'm glad you're here." Zira's throat tightened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The words she wanted to say were caught in her chest, her emotions tangled and uncertain. But Ethan's presence had a way of making things clearer, of making her feel like maybe, just maybe, She could let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can change." Ethan stepped closer, his expression softening. "It's not about being perfect, Zira. It's about the choice to do better, the choice to try, even when it feels impossible." Zira looked down at the ground, trying to steady her breathing. She had always been taught that there was no room for hesitation, no room for second chances. Once a decision was made, it had to be carried out, no questions asked. But Ethan was showing her something different. He was showing her that there was strength in vulnerability, that admitting uncertainty didn't make her weak. It made her human. "I've spent my whole life following orders," Zira continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I've never been allowed to question anything, and now I don't know what to believe anymore." Ethan gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Take it one step at a time. No one expects you to have all the answers. But you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." Zira felt a wave of emotion crash over her, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel. She wasn't sure if she was ready to leave everything behind. The empire, her past, the life she had known, but she knew she couldn't continue down the same path. Ethan had given her a glimpse of something different, something better, and now she had to decide if she was brave enough to take that step. "I've hurt people," Zira said softly, her voice trembling. "I've done things that can never be undone. How can I ever make up for that?" Ethan's eyes softened, and he stepped closer. "You can't undo the past, Zira, but you can shape the future. You can choose to help, to make a difference. You don't have to be defined by what you've done. You can choose to be defined by what you do next." Zira looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was sincerity. For the first time, she felt as though she was seen for who she truly was, not just the assassin she had been made to be. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "It's okay to be scared," Ethan said, his voice gentle. "But don't let that fear stop you. Fear is a part of all of us. What matters is how we face it. You don't have to face it alone." Zira felt a tear slip down her cheek, a tear she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years. She had always believed that showing emotion was a weakness, but in that moment, with Ethan's kind gaze on her, she realized that it wasn't. Being vulnerable, being human, it wasn't weak at all. It was strength. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice quiet. Ethan smiled again, that same peaceful smile. "You've already started. The first step is right here, right now." For the first time in her life, Zira felt like she was on the right path. It wasn't a path of violence, of death, or of the cold orders of the empire. It was a path of possibility, of hope, and of change. And no matter how long it took, no matter how many steps it would take, she was ready to walk it. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also a strange sense of purpose. Zira had made a decision. She was no longer a tool of the empire, and she was determined to find a new path. But the road ahead wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of her past would come crashing back, reminding her of the life she had left behind. But in those moments, she thought of Ethan's words, of his unwavering belief that she could be more than just an assassin. It gave her strength when everything else seemed too difficult to face. Zira spent time with the people of the settlement, learning what it meant to be part of something greater than herself. At first, many of them were hesitant to trust her. After all, she was an alien assassin, someone sent to kill them. But with each passing day, Zira worked hard to show them that she wasn't that person anymore. She offered her skills to help protect the settlement, using her training in combat, stealth, and strategy to aid in the defense against the Empire's soldiers who sometimes tried to attack or intimidate them. She fought alongside the people she had once seen as enemies, and in doing so, she began to understand what it truly meant to fight for something worth believing in. Ethan's presence was always a comfort. He was a leader, but unlike any leader Zira had ever known. He didn't demand respect through fear or authority. He earned it by showing kindness, by putting others before himself, and by standing firm in his beliefs. His determination to create a peaceful future for everyone, human and alien alike, was something Zira had never seen before. It was as if he carried the hope of the entire galaxy on his shoulders, yet he never asked for anything in return. He didn't want power or control. All he wanted was for people to come together and work toward a better tomorrow. As the days turned into weeks, Zira and Ethan spent more time together. They trained, strategized, and even shared quiet moments where they simply talked. Zira learned more about Ethan's vision, his hopes, and the struggles he faced every day. She also shared parts of her own past with him, how she had been raised to believe that violence was the only answer, that emotions were weaknesses, and that there was no place for compassion in a galaxy that had known nothing but war. Ethan listened patiently, never judging her, never making her feel like she was less than who she was. He understood that change wasn't easy, and he made sure she knew that she wasn't alone in this journey. But despite the growing bond between them, Zira knew that the Empire wouldn't just let her walk away. The Empire's reach was vast, and it didn't tolerate traitors or those who defied their orders. Zira had no illusions about the danger she was in. She had turned her back on the Empire, and they would come for her. And when they did, they would not be merciful. One afternoon, while Zira and Ethan were reviewing maps of the area, preparing for a possible attack from the Empire, a group of resistance fighters arrived at the settlement. They were led by a man named Kale, a former soldier who had defected from the Empire after seeing the horrors it caused. His team had been scouting the surrounding regions for days, trying to find the Empire's movements. They had come with urgent news. "The Empire is moving closer," Kale reported, his voice grim. "They've sent more troops, and they're preparing for a full-scale attack. We don't have much time." Ethan looked at Zira, his expression unreadable. She could see the tension in his jaw, the weight of the responsibility he carried. But she also saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to back down. Zira felt a surge of resolve within her. She knew this was the moment where everything would change. The Empire would not stop until they had destroyed everything Ethan had worked for, everything they all believed in. But Zira wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived here. She wasn't just an assassin anymore. She was part of something bigger. She was part of a team, a family, and she was willing to fight for them. "We need to act fast," Zira said, her voice steady and strong. "We have to make sure the settlement is protected. If we can't stop the Empire now, we won't get another chance." Ethan nodded, a look of gratitude in his eyes. "We'll need everyone's help. We can't do this alone." The plan was set into motion quickly. Zira and the resistance fighters worked together to fortify the settlement. They set up defensive positions, prepared weapons, and organized the civilians to take shelter in the underground bunkers that had been built for emergencies. Zira's knowledge of military tactics was invaluable, and she offered advice on how to maximize their chances of holding off the Empire's forces. As the sun began to set, the first signs of the enemy's arrival appeared. The distant rumble of engines and the glint of metal in the horizon were all they needed to know that the battle was imminent. Zira's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't feel fear. For the first time in her life, she felt something else: hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Ethan, and she had the people of the settlement by her side. They were all fighting for the same thing: a future where peace was possible. The battle raged for hours, the settlement under siege by the Empire's forces. Zira fought alongside Ethan, her blade and her training keeping the enemy at bay. She was no longer just an assassin. She was a warrior, fighting for a cause greater than herself. Every move, every strike was a testament to the strength she had found within herself. She fought not just to survive, but to protect the future she now believed in. When the dust finally settled and the smoke cleared, the Empire's forces were retreating. The resistance had won, but it had come at a cost. The settlement had been damaged and many of the defenders had been injured, but they were alive. They had fought together, and they had held their ground. Zira stood at the center of the battlefield, her body covered in dirt and sweat, but her spirit stronger than ever. She looked around at the people who had fought beside her. They were tired, battered, but they were victorious. And in that moment, Zira realized that she had found something she had never known before, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. Ethan approached her, a weary but proud smile on his face. "You did it," he said quietly. Zira nodded, her eyes filled with emotion. "We did it." It wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about everything they had fought for, the chance for a future where peace was possible. And as long as they stood together, Zira knew they could face whatever came next. The days after the battle were filled with both relief and uncertainty. The settlement had survived the Empire's attack, but the victory was not without cost. Homes were destroyed, and many had been injured. The people of the settlement worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been lost, but there was an undeniable weight in the air. The Empire would not stop coming, and this was only a temporary victory. Zira knew that much. She had been trained to understand how the Empire operated. They wouldn't back down after one defeat. They would regroup, they would plan, and they would strike again. But Zira didn't feel fear anymore. She had found something that made her stronger than any weapon: purpose. She had chosen to fight for something greater than herself, and that was a cause worth dying for. But she wasn't going to die. Not yet. Not while there was still hope. Ethan spent most of his time leading the efforts to rebuild. His calm presence was a source of comfort to everyone. His belief in the cause, his vision of peace, kept people going even when the task seemed impossible. But Zira could see the strain on him. The Empire's constant pressure was wearing him down, and there was always the fear that the next attack could be the one that broke them. One evening, as the stars began to shine brightly above the settlement, Zira found Ethan standing alone at the edge of the settlement, looking out into the distance. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the horizon. Zira approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him at first, but eventually she spoke. "You look tired," she said gently. Ethan turned to her, offering a tired smile. "It's hard not to be. The Empire never stops. We've won battles, but they're still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment." Zira stood beside him, looking out at the same horizon. "I know," she said quietly, "but we won't stop either. Not as long as we have each other." Ethan nodded, his gaze softening. "I'm glad you're here, Zira. I couldn't do this without you. You've proven more than I could have ever imagined." Zira felt a warmth spread through her at his words. She had started out as an assassin, someone sent to kill him, and now she was standing by his side fighting for the same cause. She had changed, and it was thanks to Ethan's belief in her and the hope she had found in this community that she had found her place. "We've all changed," Zira said, turning her gaze back to the settlement. "We're stronger than we were before." Ethan sighed, his voice filled with a mixture of determination and sadness. "Maybe, but the Empire is relentless. They won't stop until we're gone." Just as the words left his mouth, the sound of engines reached their ears. Zira's heart sank. She recognized the sound. The Empire was coming again, this time in greater numbers. The time for waiting was over. It was time to act. One final time. "We need to prepare," Zira said, her voice sharp with urgency. Ethan nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "This is it then. We stand and fight together." As the sounds of the Empire's approach grew louder, Zira and Ethan quickly gathered the remaining members of the resistance. The settlement was no longer a place of quiet refuge. It had become a symbol of defiance. The people here were ready to fight for what they had built, and they would not let it be taken away without a fight. Zira worked with the others to set up defensive positions, directing the citizens to safety while the fighters took their places. She knew the Empire's tactics. They would come in waves, sending their strongest soldiers first to break through the lines, followed by overwhelming numbers to finish the job. The key was to hold them back long enough for the civilians to escape. If they could keep the enemy at bay long enough, they might be able to outlast the assault. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We can't let them break through. This settlement, this place, it's the heart of everything we're fighting for. We can't lose it." Zira placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "We won't lose it. Not as long as we're standing." The battle began just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The Empire's forces arrived in full force, their machines of war rolling forward, their soldiers marching with precision. The clash of metal and the roar of engines filled the air as the first wave of Empire soldiers advanced on the settlement. Zira and the other fighters held their ground, pushing back the first wave with everything they had. Zira's combat skills were put to the test as she moved through the battlefield, taking down enemies with a speed and precision that left even the seasoned fighters in awe. Every strike, every movement was purposeful. This was her purpose now: to protect the people she had come to care for, to fight for a future she believed in. Ethan was everywhere, leading the charge, inspiring those around him with his calm and unwavering resolve. His leadership kept the fighters focused, reminding them that they were not just defending a settlement, they were defending a future of peace, a future where the Empire's tyranny would be nothing more than a distant memory. But the Empire's forces were overwhelming. The battle raged on, and the resistance fighters began to tire. Zira could feel the weight of the fight pressing down on her. She had fought so hard to protect this place, but the Empire's army was relentless. They couldn't keep this up forever. And then, just when it seemed like they might be overwhelmed, Ethan's voice rang out across the battlefield. "Fall back! Protect the civilians!" Zira's heart pounded as she turned to face him. "What are you doing?" she shouted, her voice filled with concern. "We need to buy them time," Ethan said, his expression resolute. "I'll hold them off. You get the people to safety." "No," Zira said, grabbing his arm. "We do this together." Ethan looked at her, a brief flash of understanding in his eyes. "You're right. Together." Together, they fought side by side, pushing back the Empire's forces with everything they had. But as the battle reached its peak, it was clear that they couldn't keep going much longer. The Empire's forces were closing in, and the settlement was on the brink of falling. In that moment, Zira knew what she had to do. She turned to Ethan, her voice filled with determination. "I'll make sure the Empire doesn't get through. You lead the others to safety." Ethan hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "No, Zira. I won't leave you." "You have to," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about us. It's about everyone we're fighting for." With a final heartfelt look, Ethan nodded. He turned and led the civilians to safety, while Zira stood firm at the front lines, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Empire's forces approached, and Zira prepared for the final stand. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for a future where peace was possible, where people could live without fear. She knew that whatever happened, this fight, this battle, was worth everything.